the Federal Reserve, in a nutshell, one is neither federal nor does it have reserves. So when I say it's not federal, it's almost entirely autonomous from our government. So you've been watching the news, Trump, he can't stand Jerome Powell, even though Jerome Powell's the one that he put in there as Fed chair. He appointed Jerome Powell. I've seen a lot of articles like, well, Trump's going to fire him. Trump cannot fire him. You can't. They're completely separate. They don't answer to the federal government. Now, what they can do is our federal government can audit the Federal Reserve. So if you remember seeing Trump at the building where they're renovating the Federal Reserve building in another building. So Trump went there to meet him personally because they're trying to audit the Federal Reserve to see that they're over spending. Essentially, there was a renovation. It was supposed to cost $2.7 billion and ended up costing $3.1 billion. So he's trying to catch them using money in unscrupulous ways so that it gives him justification to be like, aha, see, I got you, I caught you, now you're fired. Because he doesn't want to wait until May of 2026 to put in a new Fed chair because he wants this Fed chair to lower interest rates to boost the economy, which it will do, but it'll also cause real estate prices to go up again too. Because if interest rates drop to 6%, right now we're at 6.6% average on mortgages, which is what 99% of Americans do because they don't know any better. They don't know that we exist and that there's a more strategic way to finance real estate. So when it drops to 6%, according to the National Association of Realtors, that's going to unleash 5.5 million buyers that have been sitting on the sidelines or sellers who are like, hey, now that interest rates are lower, now I can reposition, either downsize and pay less for my new home or upgrade and it not be as expensive. Because right now they're just sitting in their home and not wanting to sell. So when you have 5.5 million more buyers on the market when interest rates drop, you have more demand for the supply that's on the market. And when demand is more than supply, what happens to prices? They go up. That's why I say for folks that are entertaining getting into real estate, buying a home, don't wait. Because you can always change the interest that you owe, either by refinancing or doing our strategy. But once you're in the home, you can't change the value. So go ahead and buy now at a low price because when interest rates drop, the home values are going to go up. So if you wait for interest rates to come down, interest rates aren't going to come down fast enough to justify the price of the home going up. What I'm getting at is, let's say you wanted to buy a home that's $500,000. Right now, interest rates are 7%. Doesn't make sense. So I'm going to wait until they drop to 6%. Okay, they dropped to 6%, but now that $500,000 home is now $650 or $700. That 1% didn't make up the difference of the amount of debt now that you're going to have to carry. So you shouldn't sit on the sidelines. But back to the original question of the Federal Reserve, they dictate our monetary policy. They dictate what the interest rates are. They keep close eye on jobs data, what the jobs report is. They also try to temper inflation, and they do so by changing interest rates. So if inflation is high, then they're going to increase interest rates, because they want people to consume less to drive down the prices of goods and services. Vice versa, if we have deflation, then they want to lower interest rates to spur the economy to get people to spend more to buy more goods and services. So if there's an oversupply of goods and services, they'll lower interest rates, kind of like no different than in the housing market. When we had this massive supply of homes, you drop the interest rates, now it creates more buyers, people go out and buy homes, and it gobbles up the supply. It normalizes the system. So that's essentially what the Fed does. Where it was created was actually in 1913, December of 1913. The reason why it was done December 23rd of 1923 is because Congress was opposed to a central bank, largely opposed to it. Obviously, you had some people that were in favor of it, but they were gone for Christmas. So J.P. Morgan was going to verbally and written say he opposes the central bank because he knew that the Congress was against him and he's Wall Street. So they would pass it just to oppose him. It's kind of like the Trump era effect, the Trump derangement syndrome. Whatever he's for, even if it's common sense, they want to be against, right? Same thing with J.P. Morgan. He would publicly oppose the central bank and they would say, no, we're going to pass it just to stick it to him when it's really what he wanted, right? So J.P. Morgan was the creator of the central bank. It was him and some politicians had a secret meeting in 1911 on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. and it was to impose a central bank in this country. And if you dictate a country's monetary policy, then you don't care what their political affiliations are. If you control the money, then you control everything else. And that's essentially what the central bank is. And they print money, and they tax that money by printing more money. So they are the reason why our dollar is almost worthless at this point. Think about it. How much did it cost to buy a jug of milk 10 years ago? A lot less than it does now. What about eggs? It's a lot, your dollar stretched a lot further than it does now. Now you got to have more dollars because those dollars aren't nearly worth as much as they were 10 years ago. So that's the Fed. So there was 4 presidents that opposed the Fed. We can get into the Civil War too, because the Civil War wasn't just about slavery. It was about states' rights, a union versus each state having its own rights and dictating its own politics and policies. But there was also a far bigger looming issue, which was they wanted a central bank in this country. There was already central banks in other countries. And again, this all comes from the Rothschilds. So the House of Rothschilds wanted a central bank in this country because we were not just a country. Now we're starting to become prosperous and we're a legitimate country. So it's like, okay, if they're going to be a legitimate country, let's dictate their currency and their monetary policy. Because if you do that, you control that country. So Abraham Lincoln was strongly opposed to a central bank, shot in the head. Garfield, opposed to a central bank. He was assassinated. Buffalo Bill McKinley, assassinated. William McKinley. And then the 4th one, John F. Kennedy, assassinated. So now we have a president that is technically opposed to a central bank. He's verbally said, I don't see a need for the Federal Reserve. And it's true, especially in a crypto world, and you have a Bitcoin reserve, you don't technically need the Federal Reserve. But you want to talk about draining the swamp and stirring up a hornet's nest? The most powerful people in this world are the creators and owners of a central bank. So obviously there's been an assassination attempt on Trump already several times. Yeah, he's not backing down. He opposes the central bank. And quite frankly, I do too. I kind of wish they would go away. And that's not a position that if you value your life, that you would be for. A lot of people have died because they oppose the central bank. But I think we'd be more prosperous if we did.